All right, all right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of In Your Element with Ardis and Eric. My name is Eric Stoller, VP of Product Strategy for Element451. And as always, now I've got my co-host back. He was absent for one episode, but my co-host Ardis Kadiu, founder and CEO of Element451. I've just added some like ghost co-founder to the list here. I've got too much
Thanks,
stuff
Eric.
in my head. Yeah, I just thought I'd change the titles around. But Ardis, this is our news show. And by the way, anyone who's watching, anytime your CEO says something, it's fine. I'll be getting some emails later about the title changes. But I think this is our news episode. We're really getting into kind of what's going on in higher education. There's never a dull moment in higher ed when it comes to the news cycle and just breaking things in terms of what's going out there. Ardis, what have you read this week? What has interested you?
So there's a lot of stuff going on around COVID. It's a really, really interesting time right now with the surge of the Delta variant and a lot of local governments and mandates being available, or actually proposing kind of restrictions on colleges, universities, or local businesses as well. So there's this interesting place where a lot of Americans feel that COVID is over and we can go back to normal and business as usual. And there's a lot of others that believe that, or even the federal government, that there's a resurgence of COVID that's happening. So one of the things that's been really interesting was this, Eric, if you go back to the top, and what you're showing here is Federal Appeals Court backs Indiana University on vaccines. And this is something that, we saw it in Florida, where the Florida government, essentially the cruise industry, decided to restrict folks who can go on cruises, and they had to be vaccinated, show proof of vaccination.
Which makes sense, because the cruise industry was kind of like one of the initial epicenters for
exactly.
the U.S.
Yeah. Exactly. So the Florida legislature decided that was not, that wasn't required, and overruled that. So we're seeing something very similar in higher education, where universities want to mandate vaccines for students. However, local governments are pushing back, and there's this pull and push, right? So what we see here was, this is really interesting, because the Federal Appeals Court decided that students have choices of where they go to school, and the university is not required. They can put whatever mandates they want. So essentially what they're saying is that COVID-19 vaccine is not special. Students are required to have immunizations against all other vaccines.
Exactly.
That is one of the things that you do when you go to school. You provide your immunization records, and that's part of it. So why is COVID-19 vaccine different than everything else? Yes, everybody can kind of push back and say, well, it's technically not approved by the FDA yet, and all of these. So it's not approved by. There's still the testing needs to be done, and so on and so forth. However,
I saw Pfizer's getting very close, I think, to FDA approval, and yeah, I mean, this is definitely a huge issue. I mean, as applications opened up for like the Common App on the 1st of this month. We're in August now. People are thinking, hey, we're kind of going back into sort of maybe a sense of normalcy, and then the Delta variant has emerged, and now you've seen like the University of Michigan, and I believe Michigan State as well, has said staff, faculty, students, you have to be vaccinated if you want to attend here. And I think that it's really shown that there's a disconnect between sort of each state kind of being able to do what they want to do. I know, like,
exactly.
My home state of Iowa, for example, when I look at the Chronicle of Higher Education, sort of they have a roundup of the institutions that are requiring vaccinations. It's like over 600 schools now, I think. And I think Grinnell College is this sort of like the one in Iowa, because they're sort of bucking the trend and saying, well, thanks, state government, we're going to kind of push back against what you've said. And it's really tricky because, like you said, Ardis, I mean, you have to provide, MMR and a lot of other sort of vaccination, status proof indicators when you join an institution. And it sort of makes sense, public health matters. And so, it is a tricky subject. It's a very politicized subject, but, at the end of the day, you hope that as a country, we kind of come together and try to, just beat this thing and get closer to a sense of normalcy far faster. And I think that's where, these issues right now around masks and there's the struggles over mask mandates. I mean, just wear a mask, right? Like, it's like, if wearing a mask helps you and helps your neighbor, helps your colleague, and helps your peers, just do it. I mean, I know there's a lot of conflict there, but it's really, it's a tough topic.
It can be very controversial, Eric. So, but for leaders in institutions, what is really important right now is to kind of continue and provide a safe environment that everybody feels like they can focus on their education, they can focus on their learning, and not necessarily, focus on, do you have a mask, do you not have a mask, and kind of have this controversy around it. So there's going to be a lot of thinking, and I'm sure a lot of planning and a lot of meetings around, what is the protocol for opening the fall semester and everybody coming back to campus. I just hope that, those decisions get made with the students' best interest in mind and not necessarily a financial reason for going one way or another.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I've been seeing a lot of articles lately around sort of just well-being and mental health. The last year and a half or so, it's taken its toll. I mean, imagine, trying to keep up your studies and do well academically and have some sense of involvement, and, maybe you're working as well, or you weren't able to like move out of your parents' house like you had planned. So there's just a lot in the mix. Yep. And so, as far as news goes, it's obviously it's a continuing story. And we'll just kind of, keep touching on it as there's sort of, breaking news that we think we can plug into the show. So similar sort of, topic, I guess, definitely related, is the American Rescue Plan, with the amazing title, the HEERF number 3. This is all about that relief fund, right? This is about providing with institutions, some cash to help them in a lot of different ways that they can use it. It's about sort of student success, providing students with support, obviously related to the CARES stuff that came out earlier, but with I don't know if people call it ARP, but to me that sounds like a really good acronym. But that's it's 76.2 billion, and that was sort of under all the emergency funds that have kind of been allocated with all of this. And one of the things that I read about this is that institutions, and this relates to some of our other shows where we talked about sort of the pace of digital transformation over the course of the pandemic. What would have maybe taken an institution, say 5 years, took place in maybe 5 months, because of the need to support students remotely, and to sort of bring technological systems and platforms up to par as they were needed in ways that they hadn't been used before. And so you look at these funds and you think, okay, what can you do sort of in the short term, the long term, and from a student engagement perspective, I know we've talked about it in terms of what senior leaders are looking at, because of course, as we previously discussed, with the Delta variant, some of the new stuff happening, are students going to show up to campus? Are they going to log into their computers, and are they going to, essentially enroll and continue on with their studies? And so, our institutions going to support students with direct funding? I saw some articles around they were basically forgiving student debt, which I know you had some thoughts on.
Yeah, using federal money to forgive student debt. So the idea there is, or at least the way some institutions are using that funding is to forgive that, and it becomes a really good PR move for them as well. However, the very small amount that they can dedicate to that hole, to the student debt hole, it's so insignificant.
Yeah. It's a drop in the drop in the drop in the bucket.
Exactly. It might be helping maybe a few individuals at the school level that they're providing that relief for. However, it's a much, much bigger problem. And I don't think it should be solved by federal money that is going to schools so they can actually survive and they can actually operate and they can actually provide that education for that student. So they should be putting that money towards operations. They should be putting that money towards, bettering their campus and kind of transitioning or going through this digital transformation. If it means better, better online courses, if it means better technology, better infrastructure, training around staff and faculty members to kind of move towards this. This is going to be, what we're seeing with COVID it's not a one-time thing. We are going to be having these types of events a lot more frequently, and building our institutions to be more resilient around that becomes even more important. So plugging in some holes right now, yes, but what we should be thinking about is how can we invest in people? How can we invest in training? How can we invest in operations infrastructure that can support that model going forward a lot longer than where we are?
Yeah, it reminds me of in the physical spaces, on campus, there's a lot of talk around deferred maintenance. Buildings not getting the upkeep that they need, and honestly, deferred maintenance when it comes to technologies and digital transformation, you're almost more vulnerable.
It's a compounding effect. It's a compounding effect. You can't, you're leaving something behind right now, but that is going to cost you double tomorrow, because not only do you need to buy the technology, but now you have to catch up with processes. You have to catch up with that transformation, with with training. So the longer you wait, the more time you lose that people have to get up to speed with everything. And it just compounds that effect. And that's not the real cost of technology. It's the cost of technology is the digital kind of adoption. It all becomes around adoption, and
right. If you've got a shiny new thing that's just sitting on a shelf, I mean,
exactly.
I've been at institutions where that was kind of the case, right? You have a company come in and they kind of swoop in and say, "Well, hey, we know you've got some money, and we're going to sell you something. It sounds great, but then no one uses it, and students don't use it, staff don't use it, and they're locked into a year, 2, 3 year contract, and that's we're not even talking about the ethics of that, right? Like the ethics of using student money to have a nice shiny piece of technology on a shelf. That always makes me upset. And there's a lot of technologies out there. The ed tech landscape is massive. When you look at some of this stuff, this is the Incura EduVentures technology landscape. Obviously I blurred out a few things because I had some time, but I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of different technologies out there, and I think you're going to start to see, and Ardis, we've talked about this, is you see a lot of sort of consolidation in the ed tech landscape. There was an article in EdSurge about PowerSchool. And, if folks aren't familiar with PowerSchool, they originally were part of Pearson. Pearson sold them off. It looks like Pearson bought them from Apple. PowerSchool's kind of been around a while, from like 2006, and then Pearson, obviously sold PowerSchool, and now PowerSchool, they just went public.
Yep, they were part of Vista Equity. So Vista Equity has, if you guys are familiar with it, has acquired or owns majority ownership in a lot of different ed tech companies, big ones as well. PowerSchool plays in the K through 12 space, but what makes PowerSchool really interesting is that they have bought technology. For some of you who might know Naviance and some of the technology from Hobson's, PowerSchool bought that technology, and now they have the they have all of the data around student records and high school student records, and about I would say 40% of the high school students, or high schools at least, are using Naviance to kind of manage those. To manage that portfolio of students, and it becomes a data grab at the end, but then they have a lot more power now to become a technology that colleges and universities will probably need to look at a little bit closer. The other interesting part here is not just PowerSchool going public, but it's the trend of how how these bigger players, or how edtech companies are getting bigger and bigger, and the need, like as they bring in private equity money, or as they bring in there's an incentive to grow, and the way that they can grow is by kind of adding additional lines of technology. So they are they're moving into different product lines, right? They're moving into different stages of the student life cycle, and they're providing different services or different technology there. And the way they're doing that is not necessarily by building their own internal technology, but by buying and kind of acquiring different companies. And that's kind of where we're seeing the growth. The one thing that we're not seeing as much is a true integration of these different services to provide a seamless experience to the students. So the end user is suffering from this. Perhaps there's on the university side, the consolidation of some of these tools is helping with budgets and helping with eliminating multiple vendors. But the student experience and the end user experience is suffering because now the integration of these tools is not happening to the level that they should, and it's essentially just putting a really nice branding on top of multiple tools, but that person still has to go to one and the other and the other. Data flows have become really cumbersome. So hopefully, that trend moves away from it, but it's unfortunate that is the reality, right? As a technologist, that makes me cringe sometimes, because
there's a lot of new coats of paint on old barns out there. I mean, because you can rebrand all you want. You can have the glitzy shiny logo, or the marketing materials that just look amazing. But then when you ask for like screenshots and you look under the hood at some of this stuff, a lot hasn't changed from sort of their original offer. And it's like you said, Ardis, it's a very disconnected, disparate experience for students when they have to log into various platforms. And also, and I've written about this when I used to write for Inside Higher Ed, students are used to modern technologies and modern interfaces and modern experiences. When, it's not as if students exist in a bubble so that they only experience ed tech and that's it. They experience all sorts of other things in their lives that is, web-based, other SaaS products. And I think that's a real challenge for campus IT. I think campus IT, has to be open to, not just trying to save a couple bucks here and there, but they always have to focus on the overall student experience, because at the end of the day, if you don't do that, you'll save a couple bucks, but how much is it, what's the loss to the institution when students are just, dissatisfied and they're not retained and they don't persist because of a variety of issues. I mean, you think about, the mobile experience for a student, it matters. It matters because most students aren't just at a desk with a huge 27-inch monitor. They're on a mobile device. They're accessing the services that they need, and they shouldn't have to log in here, and here. And it shouldn't look like tax software, right? I think that's sort of always been my go-to example.
Now, look, there's a lot of really great companies that are doing right by the end user and by students, perhaps in different areas. But what we're talking about here is the general trend on how a net tech company or a technology provider in education becomes bigger and bigger, and kind of the bigger they become, the more pressure there is to grow, and the only growth that they can come is by kind of going into different verticals, and that's where where that's kind of how we're seeing this. So great point. It'll be in the future, technology, as we're seeing in education, there's potential. There's a lot of potential, and there is capital being brought into the technology space. We're seeing it from our side. We're seeing the trends with our competitors and from bigger players as well. It's grown fast over the last year because of the digital acceleration, digital adoption, and digital transformation acceleration. I don't think it's going to slow down. It will only continue to do that. And it's going to be more global as well. So, recruiting students internationally, or somebody can just take classes internationally from wherever they are. That trend is going to continue to be true. And it will require more sophistication from the school side to figure out an ecosystem that they want to go with, because it's very difficult to move from one to the other. And that's kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, well, they get entrenched, right? You get stuck with sort of like, I'm hyper specialized in old technology. That makes it hard, in terms of roles, to sort of adopt and progress and change. And I think that's where, when you look at the technology tools that you use in your day to day, you don't have to be an expert, right? Like the things that I do on a daily basis when it comes to various, softwares as a service, I'm able to do these things without being an expert. And I think that's what students need. That's what students require, because they've got so much going on in their lives, and also with staff and faculty. So, as this EdSurge article says, right, the next wave of ed tech is going to be very, very big, very, very global. We're riding that wave, and obviously super excited about it. Any final thoughts today as we close out the show, Ardis?
No, it's certainly an interesting time right now. So for those of you who are in the ed tech world and love ed tech and kind of the technology side and want to see that, one of the conferences that's happening right now that brings together a lot of technologists and kind of forward thinking and trends, it's ASU GSV. So that's happening. It's both virtual and also in person in San Diego, I think. So it's a conference that brings together a lot of leaders and thought leaders around education. So if you have a chance to register for it virtually, I think virtually is free, ASU GSV. It's going to be next week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I think. Catch some really interesting sessions there. Next week, we'll probably bring together some news from the conference, and also there's the Halon IQ report on global ed tech as well. So we'll try to kind of parse some things out of there as well. So as you see the show, we're a lot more interested in what's happening on campus, trends that are happening, news, but also kind of bringing you the technology angle as well, and the kind of what's happening on the ed tech side. And so those are of interest to us. So if you like that, and if you have other ideas or other kind of topics or verticals that you want us to focus on, feel free to comment on any of our social channels as well, and we'll make sure to kind of bring them on and give our own commentary on it as well.
That's great. Thanks for the plug for ASU GSV. And next Monday's show, it's always our product show, sort of as we offer up different solutions and how we can help higher ed. We're going to be doing a deep dive into our events. We kind of all the different things around campaigns and emails and virtual events or in-person events, and we have microsites kind of handling all of that sort of logistical stuff. So tune in next Monday at 10:15 for that show. And until then, my name's Eric Stoller. And that's Ardis Kadiu on the other side.
Good. Thank you, everybody.
See you next week.